In this video, we'll talk about supply. Now, if you think about demand and supply, these are two sides of the same coin, and a lot of what is going to follow is going to make a lot of sense if you make sure you think like a seller. Okay, so don't forget that when you're thinking about demand, you're thinking like a buyer, but when you're thinking about supply, then you're thinking like a seller. Okay, so the first thing we want to define is what do we mean by quantity supplied. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is understand that quantity supplied of any good or service is the amount that sellers are willing and able to sell. Okay, so again, willingness is not the only thing that matters, but the ability to sell as well. Okay, and this takes us to the next point, which is law of supply. So just like we had talked about the law of demand, we can think about the law of supply. So if you are a seller, and let's say you sell lattes, if the price of lattes in the market goes up, this should incentivize you to supply more lattes, okay? Everything else remaining the same, everything else constant. And we'll talk about everything else in a few minutes. But here the idea is that the law of supply states when the price of a good or service rises, the quantity supplied of the good or service rises. Okay, and similarly, when the price falls, the quantity supplied falls. Okay, other things remaining equal. Remaining equal, or ceteris paribus, or everything else remaining constant. So let's turn to looking at the supply schedule for Philz Coffee. Okay, so if you've tried Philz Coffee, you don't want to go anywhere else. At least I love Philz Coffee a lot, but here we can try to look at the supply schedule, which is very similar to a demand schedule, but now you're just thinking about it from a seller's point of view. Okay, so the question here that we want to ask when we're constructing a table like this, or supply schedule like this, is how much are we willing to supply at $0? Okay, so are we supplying anything? If we own Philz Coffee, are we supplying any lattes at $0? Maybe not. Okay, but at $1 per latte, we might be incentivized to supply 3 lattes. And similarly, as the price goes up, we might want to supply more and more. Okay, so you notice that this supply schedule for Philz Coffee is following or obeying the law of supply. Okay, so as price goes up, quantity supplied is also going up, everything else remaining the same. So a supply schedule is just a table like this, a table that shows the relationship between the price of a good or service and its quantity supplied. Okay, so now we can take this supply schedule and try to plot a supply curve, just like we plotted the demand curve in the like a couple of videos ago. We can do the same thing with supply. Okay, so a supply curve is just going to do the same thing, put quantity on the x-axis, price on the y-axis, and remember not to confuse this. Price usually is written first in the supply schedule, even in the demand schedule, but when you're trying to figure out what the coordinates are, then you're gonna look at quantity first, which is x, and then y. Okay, so this is going to be x comma y. Okay, so you want to make sure you write this for yourself. 0 0 3 1, these are the points we're going to plot. 6 2 9 3 12 4 and 15 5. Okay, so let's draw this to scale. So here we know that if we are looking at the x-axis, we can draw this in increments of 3, 6, 9, 12, and 15. And then we can draw the same thing here with prices. This is 0 right here, right? This is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so let's draw these points. It says 0 0, which is this point right here. Let's use a different color so we can see this. 0 0 is right here, 3 1 is right here, 6 2 is here, 9 3 is here, 12 4 is right there, and finally 15 5 is here. So you want to join these points. Okay, again, this may not be as straight as I would like it to be, but that's because I'm not drawing it absolutely accurately. But what you have here, this red line, is your supply curve. And notice this is an upward sloping straight line, which is telling you that there is a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. So as price would go up, quantity supplied would also go up, right? If we were at a price point of 1, we're only supplying 3 units or 3 lattes. But if we were offered a price of 3, then we want to supply more lattes. Okay, that's the idea. So as you're moving along the curve, you're supplying more. And so a supply curve is a graph with price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. Now let's turn to how we move from individual supply to market supply. So here we have Phil's coffee and the quantity supplied at each price, but then we can also introduce Pete's coffee and ask them the same question. What are they willing to supply at each of these prices? How many lattes can they supply at each of these prices? Okay, and we want to use that information to get to market supply. Okay, So what we're going to do here, we're just assuming that there are two suppliers of lattes, but in practice you can have many more. But let's say Pete's preferences look as the following, look like the following. So 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. Okay, so what you want to do now is add up the quantity supplied from each of these two suppliers and get to market quantity supply, which is again 0 if things were free, 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25. Okay, so we can take this information, right? This is market supply, okay, and these were the prices, and we can then plot market supply. So if you plot these, you would get an upward sloping supply curve, okay? And you can try this at home.